So hi, I'm Gagandeep Bhullar and I'm the founder of a company called the SuperHuman Race. I think this session actually started on a very interesting note. So Akshay, you summarized the context of CSR and then we got into the what a little bit, so what's happening in the country. And then we heard from ma'am here and she talked a little bit about the how. So I want to go into the why. Why is technology and data relevant in this space? And I ask this question and I request that all of you take a moment to reflect on this because I think that today technology and data, they've become something that as a community, as a nation, as a world, we've become slightly obsessed with. So even if I go for a run, or if I want to cook something, or I want to make friends, or I want to go watch a movie, I would want to go check hundreds of reviews before I make that final decision to buy. So we've become a little bit obsessed with data and technology. So it's very important to take a step back and think about why does technology and data matter within the social impact space. And as we get into that, I think it's important to remember that we are human beings at the end of the day. As human beings, we have a deep psychological need to put everything in a frame of reference. And as a derivative, organizations as a derivative of human beings like to do the same. So we like to put things in a frame of reference. How am I doing relative to my neighbor, relative to my peer, relative to my competitor, and relative to the world that I live in? So this is something that I think is a deep psychological need that human beings have. And so based on that, on this psychological need, if you take again a moment to think about it, you'd realize that within the social impact space, this frame of reference philosophy is very, very important. And why is it important? Because our frames of reference, our opinion of how we are doing, it informs our decision making. And why is decision making in social impact important? It is important because it determines the extent of the impact that you're going to have as an organization or as an individual. So as a decision maker, whether I'm a primary decision maker in a household or whether I'm the primary decision maker in an organization, I actually make decisions which will influence the lives of my beneficiaries on a day-to-day basis, on a long-term longitudinal basis. And having that power in our hands kind of puts a huge responsibility on us. So these frames of reference become very significant as we become decision makers that could impact the lives of hundreds of or thousands or millions of beneficiaries around the world. Now, having said that, I want to touch upon three things very quickly, which I think you're going to remember after the session because they're very simple, but even if you are a layperson, they could help you make a determination as to whether you need technology in your organization and what should you be thinking about as you start deciding that you need technology and you need to collect data and so on. So the first of those, actually I'll quickly summarize the three. So the first is intelligent questions rather than intelligent data. The second is fluidity. And the last is the gestaltist view or completeness. So when I talk about intelligent questions, here's a very interesting thing for you to think about. Is data intelligent? Is technology intelligent? I see a few heads shaking. I see mostly just silence around the room. So I'll tell you. There are technologies which can mimic human intelligence, but by default, technology and data are not intelligent. Human beings are intelligent. You're intelligent. I'm intelligent. But data is not intelligent. Data is just data, right? So the first most important thing that we need to do is ask the right questions. Ask very intelligent questions of the data that we have and the data that we should be collecting. So you mentioned, Akshay mentioned that we should be thinking about data from planning to implementation to wrap up, end to end, right? And the questions change as we go through that complete process. The questions might change based on the implementation partners we have or the locations that we are implementing in. So the first very important thing to do is ask the right questions and then see if you're collecting data that answers the questions that you're asking as a preliminary step. And then Swati ma'am, you talked a little bit about multi-stakeholder setups, right? So data fluidity relates with that. So what is data fluidity? It sounds like a very fancy jargon, but I just basically dumbed this down for myself. So when we think of data and the way data is collected today, many of you work with Excel or with other formats of data collection. You see that data is always collected in these very fragmented formats, and then we analyze them in the same fragmented formats. Data fluidity is basically making those watertight compartments of data permeable. So now data is able to flow from one compartment to the next, and what that does is that it actually mimics the process of generating an insight. So ma'am here has studied psychology. Maybe she can confirm or refute what I'm about to say. But according to psychologists, the process of coming to an insight is that you receive information or data from various different sources. You sit on it for a while, so it simmers for a bit, and then it starts giving you insights which create these aha moments, that there's this solution that is available in aerospace which could potentially become an answer for some problem in telecom, right? So that's the process of generating an insight. So getting your data to do it for you through lazy intelligence is something that we need to start thinking about as CSR professionals, sustainability folks, and even as people. So just aggregating your data in a way that keeps it fluid, that's very important. And then the last thing, and my favorite part of this, is the gestaltist view. So what is the gestaltist view? The gestaltist view basically talks about the whole being larger than the sum of the parts. And so again, ma'am, referencing something that you said, we live in a very dynamic world today, right? And this dynamic world has a multi-stakeholder arrangement, even as individuals. So there was a time when you did everything for yourselves. The men went hunting and the women went gathering, and that's how the household was run. But today we have maids. And then in organizations, similarly, there are large teams, there are geographically distributed teams, then there are implementation partners who will go and implement the programs across different parts of the world or different parts of the country. So very, very distributed allocation of duties. And what that does is that over time, unless there is technology and data to bring it all together, the parts become larger than the whole, which is not an ideal situation to be in. Because if you can only see parts of the embroidery and not the whole tapestry, you're not going to understand what the picture is. So to get that full picture view, it is very important to employ technology and data so that inputs from these multiple stakeholders are recorded real time, just as you said, and then communicated back to the decision makers. So that decision making actually becomes very, very responsive. Rather than reacting, we are responding. Rather than making 5-year plans, we are able to quickly adapt to the situation that we are in. So for example, if waste becomes a bigger problem than plastic, we are able to address that. We become agile as organizations, as nations, as people. So that's what I have to say. So I think fantastic question. Akshay asked us here about at what point in the full spectrum of activities does data become really important? And I think the question to ask before that is, what is the unit of that data, right? So when you start thinking about units, we are typically thinking about pounds or liters or meters. But is that the only way to look at units, right? So when you're in the social impact space, I think a lot of organizations, they think of units only as beneficiaries. What are the lives that I've impacted? But that is not the full story, right? And that's the reason why we need to start asking ourselves, what is the unit that matters most to my company, my organization, or to me as a household, right? So the unit that possibly matters most to you could be money, right? So what is the value that you've created in terms of the income that you've generated in those communities? Or what are the costs that so how have you increased the spending capacity of those rural people by making sure that they don't suffer from diarrhea anymore, so they don't spend on travel and healthcare related expenses, right? So I think the first question to ask is, what is the unit? And then as we start asking ourselves what that unit is, we need to start asking different questions at every step. So the questions and data at each step are important, but they keep evolving. So at the planning stage, for example, a lot of organizations do not do this, but it is extremely important that we set targets. If you don't have a target that you set, what are you measuring impact against? If I don't say that I'm going to impact 100,000 people, I might impact 10,000 people and be mighty pleased with myself, right? So at planning as well as implementation and end of life, I think the questions keep evolving, and it's important for us to keep that in mind as we go through the process. your question, sir. You really inspired something in me. I'm going to reference a case study from some work that we've done with an organization that operates like a corporate, is actually a PSU, so from the government, and they've worked in the Northeast. So they've worked in 5 villages that they had adopted across the country out of the 50 that they've adopted in total were in the Northeast. And I can tell you with some confidence, because I've overseen that we've transferred data for more than one village a day, and 1,800 data points have been transferred every week, corresponding to the work that is done. And based on what you asked, the only way to ensure that work is getting done is to follow an evidence-based framework, because promises made, promises kept mean nothing if there is nothing to show for it. So that's kind of what I'd like to complete with.
Join the race of everyday heroes. Become superhuman.